Okay, hi everybody. It's great to have you here. I'm Patrick. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Palucki Coaching Research Institute and the Holistic Training company. And I'm going to present you something about, basically, I'm going to present you a novel healing method um, for trauma. And it's a great location actually to talk about new healing methods for sexual abuse, trauma, based on indigenous wisdom. And here we go. A little bit about me. I have became interested in consciousness very, very early in life. I was becoming aware of being at the age of 4, and that was also the moment when I became aware of humans destroying other species, other life, and the beautiful nature on this planet. And that kind of put me on the course. Here on the upper left, for instance, there's some drawings of the brain from me when I was 10. In my adolescence, I thought about it for some years, and I identified the most fundamental issue of somehow changing the course of humans on this planet will be found in consciousness. So I was always interested and dedicated to the exploration and development of consciousness. At the beginning of my adult life, I was actually a designer and an artist with digital media. That, amongst others, brought me to live in South Asia together with my interests in Buddhism and Hinduism, and I worked at a Buddhist theater for several years. So that was a 400-seat theater specializing in Buddhist plays. And before show here, the whole team got together and was worshiping the spirit of the teacher. Then later on, my journey brought me to, I was always looking where people who are interested in the same stuff that I am, and eventually I found the science of consciousness. And I never knew something like that existed. And scientists liked me, and I started collaborating with scientists in the US and in Canada about 10 years ago. And you see me here very happy with a brain. Even though I wasn't a scientist, I became a resident and guest researcher at this lab of this legendary person called Dr. Persinger, who was the first one to stimulate brains with electromagnetism. And he is the inventor of the God helmet, which caused international media attention in the 80s. And so he allowed me and some neuroscientists to develop our idea for a brain-computer interface for meditation. And what you see here is me interacting with 3D visualizations that I see here in virtual reality of my own live brain data. So that was interesting times, and a little bit about me. And here is Jeffrey Martin actually trying our device in 2015. So yeah, but what is this about? This is not about something technological. This is my mother, Ilona. And here's the story. So in 2008, 16 years ago, at the age of 62, my mother had already experimented and developed a breathing technique. And on this one day, she woke up. She was in a study group learning some healing method with a group of other women. And one day she woke up in 2008 with this pretty elaborate idea or vision how to treat negative emotions or how to treat trauma. And we don't exactly know how it happened, but that she came up with this like that. But so she tried it on one of the women in the group who was severely sexually abused by several family members over many years in her childhood. And after 2 hours, the woman had lost all negative emotion associated with the event. So she could remember the event, but the emotional valence was gone. She could not retrieve emotion to it. And that was curious. And after she tried it another 5 times, it became even more curious. And as I said, this was 16 years ago. And now she has treated over 250 people with this method. And the results are the same in over 90% of all cases. As we will see during the course of the talk, or perhaps towards the end, there's a fit for finders especially with those with an education or an inclination for healing and this specific therapy. That's why I like to present this here in this community. So because I think this could be a great option to live and work as a finder, it could be a great option for us to find suited therapists. Trauma. It is considered to be one of the major hindrances to achieve finding, so the topic has gained some focus in the community. Anyway, even though I'm presenting a bunch of science, I don't view this as a science talk, or I don't claim this to be a science talk. And we will go through these three things. So what about trauma as a challenge for society and human stewardship on the planet? What about the solution that we offer and its potential fit for finders? Okay. We want to live in peace on earth. Can we? Turns out adverse life experiences, ALEs, actually I coined this, it's originally coined adverse childhood experience as ACEs, but I broadened it, I took the liberty to broaden it over the course of life because, if you get raped in later life, that's also an adverse life experience. And those can have severe impact on mental and physical functioning. And here we see a range of examples for us. Acts of violence, assault, war, terrorism, abuse, of course, especially in childhood, as well as neglect, but abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. Lack of love to be mentioned, above all, lack of respect and support, and those especially in childhood, but also later in life, known as in Germany as mobbing or in English as bullying. And of course, loss or separation or death of loved ones and divorce. And turns out actually divorce is actually an unseen source of, let's say, burdening experience. Accidents, car crashes, and so on, life-threatening illnesses or even medical procedures and natural disasters, all these can cause trauma. So what is trauma? And I'm just want to put it very, very simple to have something to deal with this here during the course of this talk. Trauma basically can be seen as locking the nervous system persistently into a state of high irritability, hypervigilance, or numbness, and hyperarousal. However, that state is not always online, but with certain cues from the environment that are relevant to the person to trigger that nervous system, then the nervous system can go into one of these three states, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And on a daily basis, it doesn't always have to be, so we will see about the spread of trauma in society in a moment. So it doesn't always have to be as extreme as somebody, starting a fight, running away, or getting paralyzed. It can be more subtle to actually realize, but a fight can show up as arguing or as verbal confrontation. For instance, you are meeting a friend for lunch, the conversation crosses a topic on gender, boom, there you are again, having several hours of heated discussion over gender non-equality or gender differences, and that's just an example. Or you have a colleague or a friend go into an extreme reaction that's completely out of proportion to what has been done. And flight just disappearing or avoiding certain situations, certain places, and loaning and freeze just a kind of non-activity. These can be effects or symptoms on the lower end of the results of past experiences. And I do like to say a trauma or burdening past experiences, or trauma and stressful past experiences, because it opens the space up a little bit more and doesn't always have this clinical notion, even though trauma, of course, now is very colloquially used for the whole spectrum. So what is PTSD? Put very, very simple, again, it's the strong acute effect of trauma on the strong end, such as experiencing flashbacks, which can be taking the person completely out of the present context of time and space and into a past, into re-experiencing a past event. Panic attacks, nightmares, and so on are some of the, also we can see physiological effects in terms of panic that are characteristic for PTSD. We see some more effects in a moment. I'll mention them briefly. So strong negative beliefs about the world is a dangerous place, everybody is a potential threat for me, or strong negative emotions, fear, anger, shame, and so on. Yeah, well, in English it stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and in German it would stand for the same. Posttraumatische Belastungsstörung, in one word. All right. How big is the problem?
It's time now, everyone. We're gonna do the compassion trauma circle. Is everyone ready to face their past with compassion? Is that a yes? Yeah! While you were growing up, during your first 18 years of life, if a parent or other adult in the household often or very often would swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or threw something at you, step inside the circle. If a parent or other adult in the household often or very often ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured, step inside the circle. If you often felt that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, step inside the circle. If your family lived in extreme poverty, step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle. Step inside the circle.
Okay, I think this video very clear. Also, what the experience of childhood trauma, what the potential sequelae and consequences of this are in later life.
He is praying that Will Smith wins. Like, please, Lord. Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth.
I'm going to, okay? I could, oh, okay.
Okay, can you read the text here on the right side? I think most of us know the scene. Will Smith, some years earlier in his autobiography, wrote, which is probably lesser known, "When I was 9 years old, I watched my father punch my mother in the side of the head so hard that she collapsed. I saw her spit blood. That moment in that bedroom, probably more than any other moment in my life, has defined who I am. Within everything I have done since then, there has been a subtle string of apologies to my mother for failing to stand up to my father, for being a coward." That makes it very clear why he did what he did in this moment. Okay. And another one, I'll read it to you. A baby is born into a family where he is ignored by his father, where he does not receive his father's attention. When he does receive his father's attention, his father constantly yells at, criticizes, or punishes him. For the first 2 years of his life, this child's mother is perfunctorily attentive but not loving, and then abandons him for a year. From the time he was born until he is an adult, he witnesses his father abuse his older brother by terrorizing him verbally. This leads to the older brother becoming an alcoholic and dying at the age of 42. He sees his parents engaged in emotionally neglectful, if not emotionally abusive marriage. And this is from the biography, How My Family Created the World's Dangerous Man, from the daughter of Trump's brother. And notice his facial expression. You can perhaps see a connection to what has been written here. Okay. So it's ubiquitous. How big is the problem? How widespread is the problem of trauma? It's ubiquitous. All levels of society, all cultures. And here you can see some numbers. Distribution of trauma and sequelae. You can't read it. In the US, among men, 61% incidence of trauma in percent, and women, 51%. In Germany, quite more small, 26% among men, 17% among women. And the incidence of PTSD of those, a fraction of that, but still dramatically high, because this is PTSD. This is the strong and acute effect. So it's ubiquitous. It can be the underlying cause of conflict, individual, societal, war, depression, psychological disorders, addiction, strong negative emotions, strong negative beliefs, avoidance behaviors, and trauma increases the probability of lower or poor performance at work, overperformance or burnout, physical illnesses, degeneration of physiology, suicide, or causing trauma in others. So it turns out we see more and more that trauma appears to be the biggest underlying cause for psychological disorder and non-well-being and conflict, and even physical disorder, showing up as long-time sequelae of stress, basically. And this understanding is now emerging more and more, and kind of a bit like falling like shadows, I think, from our eyes and of the people who deal with psychology. And actually, that info has been withheld actually for some time by some of those that write those manuals. Okay. What do you mean by trauma expression?
His facial expression. She's saying his facial expression, people respond to it favorably. Maybe because they have a resonant response from the childhood.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, could be quite likely with those mirror neurons. Very interesting. Okay, and it's making things even harder, because arguing with a person with trauma is basically impossible, if in the mode, in one of these three modes. So that makes it also difficult for progress. When in the mode, the brain can't process rational arguments because it in other older areas of the brain. Negative emotions and negative beliefs about the world are among those effects that we as a society have to deal with. And then even worse, it's like a chain reaction, and it's transgenerational. One person with trauma has a probability to traumatize another person with his behavior. And one person can traumatize many, many people via the occurrence of war. So I would arguably it's the biggest problem in human consciousness that we would have to deal at this moment that has this strong valence, apart from, let's say, a missing connection to the world outside and missing empathy to, the natural creation of this planet. Okay, so we come to existing therapies. The field of psychotherapy has developed and thoroughly researched therapies that are successful in helping people with trauma. We can also be thankful to have a therapeutic support system. According to meta-analyses, so what is meta-analysis or meta-study? Meta-study takes many, many existing studies, basically looks for the broader picture, how effective are these or those things. And so here are results of meta-studies of trauma therapies. And we see 20 to 40% success rate. Improvements often don't last very long. Measured is mostly, and this is something about these studies, measured is mostly a decrease in symptoms, but rarely a quality, the quality of life. So what is the actual experience of the person after having finished a therapy? Therapy usually intends to restore baseline and not to increase quality of life or well-being as such. And that's also, just how these things are set up in the West. So the secret of healing is obviously not discovered, and therefore the declared goal is learning to have to live with it. At least that is very often what is being said, or what therapists or in clinics is being told to patients. I'll not go into this. This is some excerpts of these studies that show what I just said. But so just recently, we have some breakthrough because psychedelics have been re-allowed for examination after 30 years of legal battle and $110 million of private funding for some people who just battled it through over 30 years. So finally, there was this phase 3 clinical trials in this, and it showed breakthrough success. It was assigned breakthrough success by the FDA, the American Health Organization. We see there a 67% of success rate after 3 months. The therapy lasts 3 months. And this is the length of therapies in general, also for these that we just mentioned on the previous slide. And after a year, without continuing additional coaching, it enhances itself up to 77%. And this is actually for loss of diagnosis. This is not for decreasing symptoms, but for basically losing the diagnosis of PTSD, which is a much, much stronger measure. And so from this, I believe, and we start to see it, that therapy is starting to change from the inside, because, there's this psychedelic drug, and the therapists also, will more and more therapists taking it to get an understanding of it. So there's a transformation going on for both the client and the therapist. Yeah, or five, 6 sessions or something like this. Yeah.
And what is this APT in brackets?
That's assisted psychedelic therapy. MDMA.
With assisted psychedelic.
Yeah, MDMA is the drug that was tested, and yeah. And now this. We see, as I told you, since 16 years, a plus 90% of success. For what is the success? For dissolving negative emotions associated with a past event and dissolving them once and for all. And our therapy lasts between 4 and 14 days. So if and that's pre-calculated, the time that it takes. So usually in our practice, we see 14 days because we get all these people that tried everything else, have been in treatment for sometimes decades and several times in clinics. And they even tried outside of the regular spectrum, everything, and then we get a lot of these. With trauma, it's like when it doesn't get treated, the longer it lingers in the system, the worse it gets because it attracts more negative incidents. So it's really the hard and strong cases where people come with like 5 or 7 or 8 traumatic experiences regularly. So we do this in 14 days. And it is extremely safe with hardly any risk of re-traumatization. Re-traumatization is always a risk. When you help somebody, you somehow have to deal with the event. So bringing up the event can, awaken all this, what has happened, and then we speak of re-traumatization if it leaves an even bigger mark just because you try to help somebody. So in this case, the risk for re-traumatization is hardly existing at all. So this exceeds what is believed to be possible actually in the human psyche and in the human body. And so regularly we just don't not only bring people up to baseline, sort of to whatever, but actually into well-being and post-traumatic growth. And that is a very high percentage that get there. Yeah. So it's also suitable for complex trauma and many small events. Yeah. So comparatively, we see something like this, with the very left one being our model, the middle one psychedelics, and the lower one the existing therapies. Okay. So we did a peer-reviewed, published university research study, and this was done in Canada actually. And so a part of the participants were actually indigenous. Here are some quotes from the paper. Of course, we are doing ground research here. So this is a study with 9 people who finished all measurements. There were 11, but not all handed in all the measurements. So all 9 participants reported good effects and some even dramatic improvements. Effect sizes, for those of you from science, range from pre to follow-up, range from high D 1.4 to even higher for some subscales like tense and negative mood. So for this study, we basically applied measures of stress. The curious thing here is that with the funding available to do something like this, I mean, this stuff is very expensive. We were looking at what happens when we apply the core element of the Palucki method, which is a 2-hour process. And so these people were all treated with a 2-hour process, only, and learning the breathing method. So it's done super quick. The people were traumatized. It's a mining town. Like there were severe trauma, like violence. So here is a graph. So it's looking a bit cryptic, but here's the baseline, and this is the stress levels, and it's roughly going. You can just imagine the stress going low, below 0, actually turning into positivity. This is a follow-up study. Here we use, and this hasn't been published, but here we use PTSD measure. For those not familiar to it, so we have 16 participants. So each of those represents a line. This is the first measure before treatment, directly after, 2 months after, 6 months after. Above 30 is a PTSD diagnosis. And from here to here is an average of 9 days. So here is the full treatment. There were some with 4 days and some with 14 days. So the average here is 9 days. And you see that all of those go below 30 and go into loss of diagnosis and don't come back up. And here are some accompanying measures. Here we see depression, also clearly going down, and here we see flourishing as a measure of human flourishing, of measure of happiness in connection to meaning and self-esteem. And these are not all that pronounced, like this one. This is extreme, but so we do therapy for trauma and not for depression. Okay, here is the evidence that we have collected over the years, and so this is, basically it has come from the grassroots. So I did my best to document everything, all that's possible. And yeah, so we have, including the studies, but without our trained practitioners. So we have huge numbers of pieces of testimonial and evidence and videos and video interviews and ongoing research and Q&A questionnaires and written feedbacks and complete video recording of a treatment. So we have over 265 treatments done and 174 pieces of testimonial. Here is Dr. Krusemark, one of the first psychotherapists that we trained. She will say something about her journey.
Ich bin Ärztin, Oberärztin noch an der psychiatrischen Klinik, habe eine Traumastation aufgebaut, kann verschiedene Traumatherapieverfahren, hatte dann diese Methode im Internet gefunden und dachte dann, ja, also entweder das ist jetzt dreist gelogen oder das ist ein Wunder und ich muss es unbedingt kennenlernen. Dann habe ich Ilona kontaktiert, war ziemlich schnell überzeugt, dass die Frau tatsächlich irgendwie weiß, wovon sie spricht. Und bin dann ziemlich schnell auch runtergefahren. Und wir haben eine Klientin kennengelernt gehabt. Ich habe diese Selbsterfahrung gemacht und jetzt, ja, was soll ich sagen? Habe ich meinen Job gekündigt und
Nach 19 Jahren.
nach 19 Jahren, weil diese Methode schneller ist und besser ist als alles, was ich bisher ausgeübt habe. Und ich bin nicht schlecht in Traumatherapie, aber das war jetzt wirklich ein Game Changer.
Okay, I have 2 interviews with clients.
Ich bin Steffi, ich bin 33 Jahre alt, bin Mama und komme aus Norddeutschland. Genau, ich bin Kinderkrankenschwester. Ja. Ich bin gekommen mit, also die Erfahrung so von meinem Erstlebensjahr bis zum 13. ungefähr war Missbrauch, Gewalt durch die wechselnden Partner meiner Mutter. Es hat keiner mich beschützt. Ich war quasi auf mich alleine gestellt. Dann Gewalt und Mobbing durch die Schule. Emotionale Vernachlässigung, Rausnahme vom Jugendamt aufgrund von gefährlicher Situation zu Hause und dann wieder zurück nach Hause kommen. Also ich hatte keine Sicherheit und keinen Halt, also keine Stabilität von zu Hause. Genau, ja. Angefangen von Übelkeit mit Erbrechen. Also ich bin wirklich auch mit Übelkeitstabletten ins Bett gegangen, weil ich abends gezittert hatte und manchmal musste ich das nehmen, weil es anders nicht ging. Ich hatte extreme Schlafstörungen über also wirklich lange Zeit hinweg und teilweise auch über Wochen und Monate mit maximal 3 Stunden Schlaf nachts. Panikattacken, eine innere Unruhe, Unzufriedenheit, kein Gefühl für mich selbst, keinen inneren Halt, gar nichts. Ja, das waren so mit depressive Stimmung. Ich war ganz viel traurig. Also es ging mir einfach, ja, das war so eine extreme Belastung für mich und ich hatte immer so eine Schwere morgens, wenn ich aufgestanden bin. Ich habe mich immer gefragt, warum. Aber das zeigte sich immer mehr und mir fehlten immer mehr schöne Momente. Die hatte ich einfach kaum noch, ja. Sie sind nicht greifbar für mich. ich versuche manchmal daran zu denken und zu gucken, komme ich da noch mal rein? Oder ist es wirklich so, dass es nicht mehr greifbar ist und es ist nicht mehr greifbar und das ist unglaublich. Also da kommt keine Emotion mehr in mir hoch. Ich komme nicht mehr ran. Ein Teil ist ein Entwicklungsprozess. Manche Dinge brauchen ein bisschen länger, aber der große Teil, der ist weg, einfach weg und das ist faszinierend und auch eigentlich unglaublich, weil ja, was das macht, ist einfach Wahnsinn, ja. Keine Panikattacken, kein Anflug von, ich kriege jetzt Herzrasen und kriege eine Panikattacke, gar nicht. Ich schlafe einfach durch und ich schlafe in einer Ruhe und dass ich morgens aufstehe und denke, ich bin richtig erholt vom Schlaf. Das ist total angenehm und ich habe keine Schwere morgens mehr. Ich kann aufstehen und ich fühle mich gut, wenn ich aufstehe. Ich hatte, was ich noch nicht gesagt habe, ist, ich hatte immer so einen Husten, der ist nicht mehr da. Mein Husten ist einfach weg und das sind so die Dinge, ich denke nicht mehr nachts. Also bestimmt, aber nicht mehr so bewusst, wie ich es vorher getan habe, sondern ich kann einfach schlafen. Mein Körper ist total runtergefahren, zur Ruhe gekommen. Diese innere Unruhe, diese Traurigkeit, dieses Weinen und an mir zweifeln, das sind so, diese Dinge sind einfach weg. Also vielleicht minimal, aber wie gesagt, Mathis braucht ein bisschen, aber es ist so gut wie weg und es ist, ja, das ist einfach schön.
Dr. Kusemark had in her clinic a case that was untreatable. It was somebody who got there 8 years ago after jumping from a bridge. And he jumped in a way that he absolutely made sure it will work. And it didn't work. So he survived, he got into the clinic, but he was untreatable because he couldn't experience feelings, like even like touching a plate, a hot plate, he wouldn't feel because of childhood experiences. His soul eventually in childhood decided, I'm not feeling anything anymore. He went homeless. He then lives in cared housing to the present day. And she always told him, eventually I will find something to help you. I just did an interview with him this Sunday.
Ich kann sogar lachen.
Ja, ja, ich merk's. Es ist super. Würdest du sagen, du bist jetzt eine andere Person?
Ja. Uneingeschränkt ja.
Kannst du dazu noch vielleicht was Erklärendes sagen, dass wir uns das vorstellen können, was du damit meinst?
Ich drücke es mal drastisch aus. Ich nehme die Welt um mich herum wahr. Ich empfinde Freude, wenn ich was Schönes sehe. Ich fühle mich gut. Ich fühle mich leicht.
Ja. Yeah, he's not that good at describing emotions yet. So how does it work? What are we doing here? It's based on two things: non-ordinary states of consciousness. We induce a non-ordinary state of consciousness. We do that via breath work, via our specific method that my mother has developed. And in that state, we release emotions thoroughly from the soul and from the body. The breath work is different to other known breathworks like holotropic breathwork or Wim Hof. And it actually expresses itself already by, we now take 1.5 days to teach this type of breathing. While in these 1.5 days, people already have aha moments and breakthroughs in consciousness and in awareness. So I just want to show a brief video of my mom, so you've seen her at least once.
Es geht um das, was im Körper vorhanden ist. Und es sind nicht die Gedanken, das Zurechtlegen des Lebens findet im Kopf statt. aber im Körper sind die Emotionen gespeichert. Und die Emotionen können wir nicht über Intelligenz aus unserem Körper rausholen. Wir müssen eine Verbindung zu unserem Körper schaffen. Wie gesagt, das ist erstmal die Atemmethode, die sehr liebevoll, friedvoll ist. Die ganze Arbeit ist ausschließlich liebevoll, friedvoll. Auch mit den Menschen, die uns wer weiß was angetan haben. Wir werden nur friedvoll, aus uns liebevoll heraus, diese Menschen final auflösen können. Wut, Zorn, berechtigte Emotionen werden friedvoll aufgelöst. Wenn wir die Tiefenseelenheilarbeit gemacht haben, kann der Mensch schon sehr schnell während der Arbeit, meistens schon in der ersten halben Stunde, plötzlich fühlen, dass all das, was ihn bedrückt hat so lange, dass das inzwischen schon nachgibt, immer weiter in die Ferne geht. Wenn die Tiefenseelenheilarbeit zum Ende kommt, sind diese Emotionen zu den jeweiligen Menschen in der Verbindung nicht mehr da.
Some other characteristics of this work: we only do one person at a time, and we go through the entire life. We don't do partial treatments. We treat every single relevant negative event in that person's life up till the day that they arrive. The therapist is only there for this one person during these whole days. There is nobody else on site for this therapist. So this is done in 4 to 14 days. And then there's a 2 months post-treatment follow-up with telephone that makes sure the established awareness is properly shielded and maintained. You can feel like how this model would be as a therapist. You have only one person at a time. You focus on him completely. You go through this whole journey together. You get very, very close and like a team. And my mom likes to say like one egg twins. This way, there's only a possibility of around 25 clients per year. But those have never to come back for anything to you or to anybody else to get treatment again for anything that happened to them before, with the mentioned plus 90% probability that I mentioned. And it literally lifts the application of consciousness and positive emotions that is so in the DNA of this method, brings people really into a state of well-being. You have seen it at these both videos. Like, this is not a single event. This is happening since 16 years in, 220, 230 cases out of 260. And this effect for the therapist is amazing. You experience so much joy by witnessing the trajectory, the growth, the journey of these people in this short amount of time, that you don't carry the burden of their past stories along with you over these years that you see them, which is a problem for psychotherapists. That's why they need a lot of self-care to deal with these stories that weigh on their shoulders as well. And how does this look on a day-to-day basis? The healing main element, we call it deep soul healing, that happens usually in the morning. It takes about 2 to 3 hours with talking before. Then the client retreats to his quarters, and there's a meeting again in the afternoon and one in the evening for integration talks about what happened in consciousness in the morning. Part of this, also a characteristic of this model of therapy, is that the client comes to live with us. Like, we are set up in the south of France. We have 2 flats for clients. There's also sometimes Ilona travels, but it has to happen in a spatial proximity and in a focused local setting where both people stick together in a good environment. And so, why finders? Why am I telling you this? So I have studied every possible detail of what my mother does that could lead to these results. And I've been looking at this for this time mentioned. I have written the manual. I have created the training program. I have looked at her voice. I have looked at her gestures. I have looked at everything. So there are bigger things that make up this therapy, which is the technique per se. But there's a lot of small details, or not small details, actually big details, that need to be also respected to as much as possible to get these type of results. And what are these? Well, enhanced awareness. We are looking for therapists or people who are suitable and eligible to do this, people with enhanced awareness for introspection, for outrospection, with positive emotions, who have a lot of joy, gratitude, and compassion, who know the holistic view and live the holistic view, who have a certain level of spirituality. We call this healed healers. So we're looking for people who serve as a role model for the client. It can be a healed, wounded healer, but the person should somehow have left the major part of the baggage he was carrying already on the side of the road. I'll tell you some more fun things, and this is actually an advertising asset that I created. So benefits for the finder. So it's a one-on-one therapy model. It's a freer and more autonomous working model. It's good to great income. There's a lot of lightness, joy, and success while helping people in need. Specifically looking at therapists, there's fewer clients, all the time that is needed for the individual, same income or more lightness, more joy, no risk of burnout, less administration, more time, of course, for other things in life. And you can already work with altered states of consciousness using breath work years before psychedelics actually have been widely approved and accepted. And obviously there's, in this case, no pharmaceuticals involved. I think I will close with this. You can ask me questions if you like. Okay. So she's a trained dance and body therapist, and she has learned various spiritual modalities, and she has been on her journey of spiritual exploration with Buddhism and shamanism. So there's various influences that came to her. She just kind of woke up with this. So the breathing was developed before, but the release system just somehow was concocted overnight. She's not unsimilar to me. We take in a lot of information. And then one day, you know, in her case this, or in my case, the brain-computer interface for meditation just, boom, just comes online. Yeah, so it's... We are selling a training program. It's a 3-month program. The major part is done online with live sessions with Ilona, me, and our 2 psychotherapists. It's about a 6-hour workload per week. And there's an 8-night in-person practice intensive where all the practice is learned. That takes 3 months. And then there's a practical phase where they have to bring the results of some treatments. We're mostly aiming for trained psychotherapists, but we look at every person individually. We don't give it to just anybody, even if it's a psychotherapist. We interview people and look for these qualities that I mentioned and see if it's a fit. Because for us, the most important thing at this moment is to maintain this success rate as much as possible. But there are also people who are really gifted and people have individual merits and experiences. So we are willing to hear everybody. Thank you.